Hi.
Hi, Heather. Good to see you.
It is nice to see you too. Would you like to start just by saying your name, maybe where you are, if you want to say your age?
Yeah, I'm Miriam Taylor, and I'm speaking to you from a small city in the east of England called Ely, just north of Cambridge.
Okay, wonderful. And the first question that we have for you is, who are you? Who are you as a person? What would be your passions or your interests or your qualities?
Oh, well, where to start? I don't know who I think I am. Might not be who I am. In a way, I've got no idea how to answer that question. Because I have my own ideas. I know things that are important to me, and maybe that's what I should talk about. But yeah, I don't know whether any of that would match up to what other people would see in me at all. The things that I get excited about are very often quite small things that really, and my eyes just falling on a pebble on my windowsill in front of me. That's got some patterns on it, and it's like, yeah, it's those things that really draw my attention and kind of bring me into the moment, and I can be available to it, to in this instance, I can be available to the pebble, and I'd like to think that it can be available to me. So I think what I'm talking about is that sort of sense of interconnectedness. So maybe that's why I have difficulty thinking who I am, because in that moment when my eye falls on the pebble, I am what the pebble makes me. Yeah. Does that make any sense at all?
It makes sense. It's I mean, every answer so far from everyone has been very different. So
Right.
is there anything that you would add to that? I mean,
so the things I do, yeah, maybe that answer was something about the way that I am in the world and the things that I do that I enjoy doing. I'm an avid reader and have been all my life. I love music. I play classical cello, or I'm learning classical cello. I'm an artist. I spend quite a lot of time in nature. And the other things that, of course, are really important to me are people, my family, my kids, my grandkids, my friends, the people I work with, Yeah.
okay.
Is that enough?
That's great. And it goes into the next thing, which is who, like what other human being would you say has had the most impact on who you are as a person and how?
My mind's whirring with, I'm kind of sifting, like, who's been the most important person for me? Personally, probably my mother, but not for good reasons. And she died 40 years ago. Professionally, I've been shaped by lots of people. I guess in the background, I've been shaped by people who were shaped by Lynn Jacobs.
Okay.
That would be one strong influence, yeah.
Mm-hmm. And just beyond the naming, is there anything you want to describe about the how of the shaping?
Oh, I learnt by example. Yeah, I think it ties in with what I was saying about my attention being drawn by small things. There's something about the kind of precision of really checking things out and really slowing down enough to really understand what's meant by something that is part of the how. Yeah.
Okay. We'll probably come back to part of that later, but one of the other questions that we have is what event or circumstance would you say has shaped you?
Oh. Again, I could think of all sorts of things. Probably the one I'm most willing to talk about right now is becoming a mother. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So what would you?
And again, and that was 40 years ago. Yeah.
Some of those things leave a mark.
Sorry?
Those things leave a mark.
It leaves a mark. Yeah, yeah.
How did that shape you?
Well, it was interesting because I said my mother shaped me in a way that wasn't good, and she died just before I became a mother, which left me free to be the mother I wanted to be.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, it shaped me in all sorts of kind of visceral, indelible, heartfelt ways. And some decisions that I made, that the buck was going to stop with me, that in kind of rewriting the script to some extent, I wasn't going to repeat some of the mistakes that had been made. And in also knowing that kind of as soon as I'd given birth, my son would survive without me. And I knew that very, very early on, which was kind of startling, that actually not that I wasn't important to him, but if something had happened to me, that he'd survive. So there was something about that ongoingness that I could trust. I could let go a bit in a way.
That's interesting.
It was kind of freeing.
Yes. Yes. Okay. Well, shifting a little bit, how did you come into Gestalt? How did that happen?
Okay, so it's fairly straightforward. I originally trained as a humanistic counsellor, an integrative humanistic counsellor, in the mid-1990s. And I remember very clearly somebody coming in to teach part of the Gestalt component. Gestalt was about a third of the training, and doing a demonstration of just a very beautiful relational, dialogic, phenomenological piece of work, 10-15 minutes, nothing very big. And That's what I want to do. I can't even remember the name of the person who came to do that. But yeah, so that was someone who changed my life in a way, or pointed me in a direction. And I knew intuitively that it made sense to train in something holistic that included the body. And what I liked about the phenomenological approach is that it's inherently non-judgmental. And I was brought up with a vast amount of criticism. And was turning a lot of that criticism onto myself. I sort of internalized it. But I knew that there was something about just noticing that was right.
Okay.
So yeah, so when I decided I wanted to go on and train as a psychotherapist, my head said, do integrative. And my heart said, nah, Gestalt. And I'm really glad I followed my heart.
Mm-hmm. So what is it that most attracts you? What is the thing that catches your attention and your interest within Gestalt, beyond what you've already said, or has that changed? Or
I have an immense respect for what we understand as the three pillars of Gestalt: field theory, dialogue, and phenomenology. I think we have a very, very sophisticated and coherent theory that's undervalued in the wider world. Yeah, I'm really quite passionate about those pieces because they mesh together. And I can remember a person-centered supervisee saying to me, she was a bit worried about working with me, being allocated a Gestalt supervisor. And actually we got on very well. And she said when we finished that I was the most person-centered person she'd ever met. And there's something about that kind of quality of respect that I think when you work slowly and relationally and dialogically, really tracking, really paying a good quality of attention, that is hugely person-centered. I love it.
mm-hmm. So how has your involvement with Gestalt shaped you as a person?
Oh, unimaginably. I mean, yes, when I came into my Gestalt training, I hadn't had an enormous amount of therapy. I'd had some, but beyond personal therapy, I think having a set of theories that's helped me to make sense of my world has helped me to make sense of other people's worlds. So there's been enormous healing in it for me. And one of the most important things that I ever learned was in a workshop with Lynn Jacobs, and that's her rupture and repair process. And that really has changed a lot, both for me personally when I've had ruptures, been on the receiving end of ruptures with people, but also there's something about it that is about taking responsibility. And if I'm working with someone and there's a misattunement somewhere, if I can take responsibility for my part and be non-defensive, and for me that's a really important part, that does something to stop me falling into a spiral of shame. Oh my goodness, I've done something terribly wrong and I feel awful and I'm the worst therapist in the world. It's like, okay, I did that. That was my part in it. I can own it. It wasn't all me. And yeah, I'm sorry. I can regret, but I can accept much more comfortably. So I think that's one enormous piece. And the other piece, of course, has been through my teaching and my writing, which has taken me to unimaginable places, including over to you in Mexico. I mean, it's astonishing from where I came from, where I started.
Mm-hmm.
Could never have imagined I'd be doing that. So
you're doing it very well, and what you're doing is very appreciated.
I know that. Thank you. And yeah. When you ask me who I am, and you know, my sense of who I am has changed exponentially through that, through all of that.
Yes, I can imagine that this is not quite what you imagined for yourself.
It's not what I signed up for.
Yes. So another question that you may or may not want to get into, this is not really relevant for everyone, but in your experience within Gestalt, is there anything that you want to say about your gendered experience or your experience as a woman?
I get very upset that there are so few men in this psychotherapy world. I mean, my way of navigating through the psychotherapy world and perhaps the Gestalt world probably has been easier because I'm a woman or identify as a woman.
How do you experience that as easier?
Because it's a predominantly female profession.
Okay.
I haven't had to fight. Yeah. So it's kind of interesting. I've been among people who influenced me and my training in a positive way. Michael Clements used to come over and do regular workshops at Metanoia Institute where I trained, and you know, his work on the body and culture, which for me includes gender, you know, how we occupy space in the world, has been pretty important for me to understand, you know, that and yeah, I know I move through the world as a woman, but in a culture, a psychotherapy culture that's more female than male, or certainly in the UK, I think perhaps I can expand a little bit more. You know, how women are kind of socialized to occupy a smaller space. Maybe that's not quite such a a difficulty. Maybe I can breathe more easily into a space where women don't have to fight.
It's interesting how you define that and how you perceive that, because some women bring that sense of self and movement and place into the therapy world. And it's interesting that you notice the different proportionality is actually there, that it is a very different distribution. And some of it, I think, is carried over from other spaces. But
yes, of course, some of it's carried over from other spaces. So you're absolutely. And I'm just wondering about, my contact with AAGT conferences. There do seem to be more men. I wonder whether in other countries or other cultures there are more men than there are in the UK. But if I'm working with a training group, I breathe a sigh of relief if I can get 2 men in a group of 12 or 16.
Yeah, that's very much my experience as well. But what you say is true. There seem to be, I don't know where they come from, because there seem to be so few male students, but there seem to be a lot of practicing male therapists and workshop leaders, which is interesting. But anyways, okay. You mentioned AAGT and you've mentioned metanoia, and I wonder, do you feel like you're part of this concept, or do you have any experience of being part of a Gestalt community? Does that mean anything to you in your experience?
Yeah, less so metanoia these days. I mean, it's now quite a long time since I qualified, but I was working there. I was an assistant and a trainer there, and later an examiner and academic consultant. I've disconnected from that in the last 2 years or so. Yeah, I think 2 years. So I'd identify with that less strongly. But there are various other Gestalt communities, sort of subgroups. AAGT is one, but we have organisations within the UK, and I'm part of a very small team offering training and coaching and organisational development. So yes, they're kind of nested. The different groups are nested within one another or overlapping one another. And they're all different communities. They all have their own personalities, if you like, and bring something to the field. Yeah.
I mean, I ask, some people are very at odds with the sense of community or with certain communities, and for some people it's something that we aspire to, and some people feel that they found it and really enjoy it. So I'm always curious.
I mean, the idea of community was always used to be a word that I kind of bristled with, because it in different contexts it didn't feel authentic. It was like a concept that was being imposed. Let's call ourselves a community, and then everything will be okay, even if what's actually happening in it isn't.
Right.
But I think I've softened my understanding of what it means.
Okay.
Just a bunch of people trying to do something.
that's a good definition.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, this is one of my favorite parts. This is a bit of the storytelling part. So I wonder, do you have a great memory, a favorite moment? It can be either in practice, in training, in the mythical community experience. Is there just one of those moments that you connect with and think that this is probably one of the good moments?
Oh, it was, yeah, well, there were 2 moments. I went and did a teaching tour in Australia last year, February, March time. And yeah, there were 2 moments. One completely changed my life. So I'd been invited to do a keynote at a trauma conference for the National Counselling and Psychotherapy Association in Sydney. And the theme that I chose was the context of trauma, partly because I'm interested in the wider field. And you know, if there are people who don't know, my special interest is in working with trauma. And I'd been sort of teaching around the edges of that for a while, and then I decided that because of the situation with the Aboriginal people and the immense and horrific trauma that they had experienced and continue to experience, that I couldn't dodge that one, and that I really had to kind of name it. And so I did lots of research in learning what I could, and really came to understand colonialism as an enormous trauma with all sorts of things going on alongside it. And at the start of my keynote, I said, well, you know, I'm standing here in a slightly awkward position, because here I am representing the colonial invading power. And I'm very conscious of that. So I will admit it, that I'm a colonialist and a racist. And there were 350 people there who just went, oh, we don't talk about that. And then, I mean, I was quite shaky. I'm normally quite confident talking to large groups of people, but my voice was quite shaky as I said it. Anyway, at the end, we came to questions, and an Aboriginal therapist stood up. He was going to do the keynote the following day, and I'd met him the night before, fortunately, but he stood up in front of all these people and said how important it was that I had said that. And by that point, tears pouring down my face, and there was just like, I dropped all my defenses. He had dropped all his defenses, and we just met across that room. And it was incredibly powerful. It was very simple, actually. It was simple, it was painful, but there was just a moment in which we could meet each other. And yeah, it changed me. I couldn't go through something like that without being changed. Yeah.
Yeah, I can't say anything to follow up on that, but I appreciate the depth in what you are saying.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm working on my second book, and have finished writing a chapter on the context of trauma, and use that story as at the end of the chapter. Yeah. So I mean, it's kind of interesting. The book's really about the self of the therapist. So. So you put me in the spot. You make me walk the talk here.
When I read the book, I can find out who you are.
No, well, it won't tell you that what I've told you. Anyway.
Well, one of the other questions is, what would be one of your most challenging moments? And I mean, that greatest memory may have also been the greatest challenge. I'm not sure. But what else would come to mind?
I mean, it was partly the greatest challenge, because I had to kind of metabolize quite a lot of that, and it was only, you know, tiniest fraction. But yeah, I did have to metabolize it. And it was very difficult to write about as well, enormously difficult to write about, for the same reason. I think in other ways, my greatest challenge was partly personal. But 3 years ago, I left the home that I'd been in for 35 years and moved to another part of the country. And that meant closing down a practice. And I'm just on a really practical level, closing down my practice was awful. Yeah, I mean, I have another practice here now, but yeah, it was difficult. It was difficult. Lost a lot of sleep over it.
Yeah, it's not something people have talked about in this series yet, but I know that ending a practice or not being a therapist anymore, for retirement or something like that, it's a huge loss. It's a grieving process. It's a very deep change.
I mean, it was a huge loss for me, but it was also a huge loss for the people I was working with.
Well, it's that show
who started throwing all sorts of stuff at me, you know, and rightly so. I'm not saying it shouldn't have happened. It was part of the process, and it was very difficult.
It is. Mm-hmm. So one of the other questions that we have is, now that you've changed your practice and now that you have moved, where do you see yourself going with Gestalt in the future? I know you've got the other book.
Okay.
Where are you going? And the other part of the question is, where do you think Gestalt is going in the future? You know, after we're all let out of our houses and things like that.
I think they're both quite painful questions. Where I think I'm going, age isn't on my side anymore, and I'm getting tireder. At some point, I will close this practice. Yeah, I don't have I'm not really ambitious. I've had far more riches than I probably deserved already, so I can't ask for anything more or better. Where's Gestalt going? I don't know. I don't have a crystal ball. I believe passionately that there's a place for Gestalt in the world. I do a certain amount of presenting Gestalt in a positive light to non-Gestaltists. And I fear that Gestalt is swimming against the tide. You know, I think it has so much integrity, but we're living in a world where integrity is it's not valued.
That's very, very true. It's not so much that it's anything inherently within Gestalt. It's just a question of what it's up against.
Yeah. Yeah. I heard a story in the last couple of weeks where somebody who was with a CBT therapist was being asked again and again what their Gestalt therapist does. Well, she listens. Yes, but what does she do? Well, she listens. But you know, surely she does something. And it was like, it sounded like they were talking at completely cross purposes, because, you know, one mindset was saying, you know, you can't sort things out unless you do something, and the other was saying actually being listened to is really, really valuable. And they're not compatible.
No, it sounds like one is it's performance and product, and the other is being. I mean, they're completely different levels.
Yeah.
Hmm. So where is it going again?
So where is it going? I don't know, but I know my heart sinks.
Oh, well, I'm sad to hear
I mean,
that.
I don't know. I mean, you know, who knows? We're living in probably transformational times.
Yes.
Who knows?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, when I say my heart sinks, I am an optimist as well. You know, I'm not a kind of, you know, grumpy old things will never change kind of person.
No, it's not how I've ever experienced you. Maybe it sinks and it, you know, puts on a life jacket and then pops back up. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
Huh.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, is there anything that you would like to add about any of this, or anything you feel is missing from this moment?
No, just to thank you. I think what you're doing is really interesting.
Okay. Well,
And yeah, no, I wish you well with this project. It's great.
well, thank you. Camila and I honestly we're having fun, and this has been wonderful. It's been very meaningful to be able to sit down and have conversations with people. Like, it really feels like we've been grabbing those little moments in the hallways at conferences. So
Yeah.
we've been trying to do. So if that's okay with you, I will just say thank you again and stop the recording here.
Great pleasure. Thank you, Heather.